listening to the Not Your Average Culture podcast, where we have candid conversations about personal growth, business, and creativity. Because, let's be honest, creative or not, life can get messy, especially if you are a creative entrepreneur. But you don't have to go at it alone. There's a whole community and culture around the lifestyle of creatives. So here on this podcast, I'm making the space to have open conversations with a wide range of dynamic people about how to successfully maintain your business, keep your sanity, while owning your authenticity and staying inspired along this journey. I'm your host, Chardonnay. Let's get to it. Hello. Welcome. If you are new here, I'm Chardonnay and the host of the Not Your Average Culture podcast, where I cover topics related to creativity, entrepreneurship, money, and technology, and how these things have an impact on our lives and influence the culture. This is the very first season of this being a video podcast, and this podcast has evolved over the years in so many ways. But that's not what we are here to talk about today. Today, we're going to be talking about a minimalist approach to entrepreneurship or soft entrepreneurship, identifying your creative capacity, and living life on your own terms. All this stuff sounds good, but what does this really mean? And what does this look like? I'm going to be breaking it down from my own perspective because these are some themes and terms I've come across or within this year from some other individuals, and I thought it was interesting enough that I thought I would share my perspective on these themes and phrases. Last year, I had a theme, and so this year, I thought it would be nice to continue having a theme to base these episodes around. Even some more technical terms and things I've learned within this past year, such as tech stacking and using AI in ways that I didn't even think I would even use or be useful, in exploring this idea of portfolio careers. It's a ton of stuff that had me rethinking the way I view productivity and just so much more. But before I get into all of that, I'd like to kick this season off with a bit of vulnerability and transparency, and of course, a bit of podcast housekeeping. So last year around this time, when I released my podcast, I was not only creatively burnt out, but I was also unemployed. I had got laid off from my full-time job due to an organizational restructure. I honestly feel like with the number of layoffs that happened toward the end of last year within 2024 across various industries, is the economy is just trash at the moment. And I don't know about y'all, but personally, I have noticed a lot of people making real bold announcements, myself included, about how I decided to pursue entrepreneurship full time. And it's like, oh yeah, really? No, let's be honest. The economy is not in the best place. It was an election year and corporate America has made a ton of layoffs. There have been numerous of organizational restructures, or whatever you want to call it. AI and technology is here, and we are all feeling the impact of the way the world is shifting, okay? Let's just keep it real, okay? So this is kind of my take on what's been happening in the world, exactly what I mentioned earlier, how technology has had an impact on us. And I just wanted to share with you all from my personal experience how I'm navigating it all. I am definitely feeling the impact of AI, technology, and just the shift in the way that the world is moving. It's also okay if you were one of those folks who were not impacted, or you were someone who was temporarily impacted and you're still trying to bounce back. It's also okay if you weren't impacted at all, but you might be feeling guilty because there are folks around you trying to figure it out, and all you want to do is just relax and go out and enjoy yourself and not feel bad or guilty about doing it because everyone else or someone around you who might be close to you, they might be going through it due to just job uncertainty. It's okay because either way, I've been in many of those situations. And we are going to talk about it more in this season of the podcast and hopefully give you a little bit of a pep talk and optimism as we step into the new year. So, whether you were impacted or not, that just means that all you have to do is get creative in how we move forward. In my previous podcast episodes, I've invited people in from the finance space on to talk about money and entrepreneurs that would be open to talking about their authentic journey, because my intention is to create a judgment-free space to openly discuss how people are just navigating life from business, personal, financial, and even a creative perspective. So I'm also going to end this episode with some practical tips, tools, and resources to help me plan for the year ahead. And maybe it will spark some ideas on how you can stay motivated with this year ahead and, quite frankly, the next 4 years. Because, yeah, I know I personally need all the motivation and optimism. So, yeah, let's just get into it. If you are listening to this podcast, I highly recommend at some point going over to check this podcast out on YouTube or wherever you typically listen to your podcast. See if they have a video version of this, because again, this is the first time that this podcast is video, and I am just super proud to share the video version of this podcast. Also, occasionally I plan to pop visuals up onto the screen to kind of help guide the conversation and give deeper context to what I'm discussing. For instance, I came across this post that reads, "Entrepreneurship is just a personal development plan, brilliantly disguised as a financial opportunity. The more you do the inner work, the more outward success you will achieve." I like this quote when I came across it because in 2024, I've definitely seen how working on myself personally has impacted my business. And I've noticed that when it was the other way around, where I was solely focused on work, I found myself feeling extremely burnt out. So you will always hear me referencing things of taking care of yourself, wellness, and all of that, because health truly is wealth. You cannot show up and be your best self if you are not feeling your best. So this season, I have some really exciting episodes and topics prepared for you all. For those who are new to my podcast, something I did last year that I'm implementing this year is, for now, this will be an annual podcast. This will be something that I do to officially bring my year to an end and reflect on what went well and what didn't go so well, and so on and so forth. Last year, I released it around the last 5 days of the year because I thought that's when folks might be traveling and might want to listen to a podcast. However, if I wanted to submit my podcast or any podcast submissions or awards, releasing it at the end of the year kind of puts me out of the time frame to be considered for anything like that. So I decided I would just go ahead and bump it up to just releasing it at the beginning of the year. So that way it gives me a chance to just gather my thoughts, reflections, and then just release it at the top of the new year and just give you all an idea of how my last year went. So here we are with a new season at the top of the year, and still ready to catch the folks looking for inspiration and just a good podcast to kickstart the new year, and allowing me the space to also be able to submit myself and my podcast to various things that might come up. I'll probably continue with this cadence until or unless I have the capacity to do this more on a consistent basis, or if my podcast gets picked up by a podcast network. I honestly don't know how people do daily podcasts, because when do you have the time to deeply reflect on what's happening in your life and within the world on a day-to-day basis? Like, how do you even have that much to talk about? Everything you say cannot be useful or that well thought out when you are releasing episodes so frequently. I understand larger podcasts have teams that can do this type of thinking and scripting for them, but personally, the way I have thought about it, especially when it comes to my creative capacity, is to do what most television shows do. put it out seasonally or annually until I have the capacity to do a weekly or daily podcast episode. One of my goals for this year is I would really like to be part of a podcast network so I can start to get paid for how much personal time and money I've invested into this podcast over the years. So, yeah, your girl is on the market for that. I'm exploring what that would look like, and if anyone has any information on how I can go about doing that, holla at your girl, okay? I'm really hoping to join a podcast network because a lot goes into producing this. While it's definitely doable, but when you are an independent creator or a solo entrepreneur, it's helpful to have a team so you can produce high quality work on a consistent basis. I also don't want to have to go out and build my own podcast network because if it's one thing about me, I'm a DIY girly and I'm not afraid to just go out and make it happen. That's just how I roll, okay? No, I'm kidding. I'm a one podcast type of gal, at least at this moment. If one podcast is a heavy lift on its own, could you imagine building several at one time? A lot goes into it, and you have to have the right investment and resources and things in place to make sure each podcast gets the support that they need. But on the other hand, if joining a podcast network is not in the cards for me, then at least this will just be a digital voice note or digital journal entry that I can reflect back on and listen to about what I was up to and what's going on in my life at the time. So, anywho, this is what you can expect to hear for this season of the podcast. I will be sharing conversations with a few folks I had the opportunity to work with within this past year. Whether I filmed a video project for them, we collaborated in some sort of creative capacity, or I came across their business or their work within this past year, and I thought it would be insightful to share those people and their stories with you all. The people that tune in and listen to this podcast, and quite frankly, who have stuck around through my journey of all the evolutions of me producing this podcast. So the lineup for this season consists of two special guests, Hannah and Katie from The Morning Brew, Martin and Kamar from The Emoja Project, Isua, the founder of Bestie Banter, and I'm also going to throw in a solo episode where I'm just going to talk about how you can exit your lazy girl era, so to speak. That's an episode that I'm really excited to share because it gives you more of a personal insight into what I do on a day-to-day basis and kind of kick out those inner thoughts that you are being lazy or those thoughts that kind of creep in as you are navigating things. More on that to come in that episode, but outside of that, I'm really excited for the guests that I have coming up this season. So I will be talking to these folks that are from various industries, but getting their perspective on what does creative capacity mean to them. Because when you think about the terms and the phrases I mentioned at the top of the episode, how do you sustain your momentum and motivation and find a balance between work and life? As I mentioned, there were countless of people, both people I know personally and professionally, that were laid off this past year or so. Fortunately for me, I've always been, and I'm always the type of person who has operated with the intent that my job is my job. It is not my life. And I learned that in 2020 and many other times before then, especially when you decide to pursue a creative career path or work within the arts. It's the whole don't be a starving artist sentiment. And if I reflect back on all the conversations I've had over the years, I've been talking to mainly creatives and entrepreneurs and getting their stories and how they have been making it work and sharing resources along the way. However, I'm not going to act like you don't feel the impact of when you lose work or suddenly the traditional work culture has shifted, or even things such as AI or the alleged TikTok ban, or even platforms like LinkedIn adding video to their platform. I'm not going to act like these shifts and these changes don't impact me and my work or livelihood, especially as someone who works in the creative industry, and more specifically, who works within media. In fact, here's another meme I crossed online, and I couldn't do anything but laugh because I could relate and resonate with this post in so many ways. So the post reads, for those who are listening, the amount of lessons I've learned since 2019 feels like 4 different lives. This meme kind of reminds me of that saying that sometimes rejection is a redirection for your life. It brought me back to 2020 when everyone switched to working remote, and it got me to thinking to many other times beyond my layoff about how this is just a shift in the way the world is operating at the moment. And with this shift, what are all the things that you need to consider? When I say you, I may mean I. These are conversations that I have personally been asking myself, like when these shifts and changes happen, what are all the things I need to consider? So I thought to myself, well, I have my emergency fund, I have my severance, I have my network of friends and family that support me, along with my many skills and talents that I can rely on. And I took an inventory of what's working for me, and I thought, okay, what's the best possible outcome if I were to combine all of the things that are working and figure out how to build around that? Basically, instead of looking at what I didn't have, I thought, what do I have and how can I make it work for me moving forward? I personally think if you are experiencing any sort of transition in life, it can be easy to dwell on all the things you lack, but I always try to challenge myself, and I try to constantly remind myself to make a list of everything I have, note the things that are working, and find a way to lean into that. Leaning into what's working keeps me motivated, it keeps my momentum going, and it just keeps me inspired personally. Also, another thing I did was I asked myself, what would it look like to design or be intentional about crafting this next year and step into it as a full-time entrepreneur? What if I can design my life around work that I enjoy while also being intentional about making time to spend time with both friends, family, and being more intentional about properly meal prepping, eating healthy, and taking the time to really take care of myself so I have the energy to do all the things I want to do and also have the time to have a hobby and work out and do whatever else comes to mind. Sounds like a lot, right? It's because it is. And I honestly can't believe now, hindsight, looking back, I was trying to do all of that all of the time. And I had to remind myself I can't be high functioning all of the time. I have to operate in seasons and phases and pace myself. I can't think of one living thing that is turned on all of the time and is thriving. So this got me to thinking, what is my creative capacity? How do I actually measure how much I'm able to produce professionally, creatively, and not burn out? So this year's podcast theme is creative capacity. Creative capacity, in my opinion, is figuring out what I have the capacity to take on as a creative entrepreneur, especially as someone who is a solo entrepreneur and who is also a content creator. And I'm actually a content creator simply because the nature of my work and the way the world is operating. However, I would prioritize and I would say that I'm an entrepreneur first. And I talked about this a bit if you're someone who follows my personal YouTube channel, but last year's theme was soft life as a creative and defining what that means for me as an entrepreneur. And I'll get more into that in a minute, specifically what steps I took to structure my day, how I went about building a routine, and how I started to practice and implement some of these new practices into my life. I know what my capacity was in a corporate setting, but what does it look like for me now that I can make my own schedule as a full-time creative entrepreneur? How do I want my year to look and feel? How much time do I need to properly prep and produce a podcast, film videos for clients, edit them, and also set aside time for me to continue to develop and perfect my craft and live a life that feels healthy and somewhat balanced. I had to figure out what my daily routine looked like and what would my year look like. Having the experience of working both as an entrepreneur as well as working in a corporate setting, I personally think it's something about the work culture that is deeply flawed, especially when people set unrealistic expectations about what goes into things. Everybody is trying to cram everything into a 9 to 5 work schedule, and some folks aren't even the most productive during that time frame. And working for myself this past year and working on myself has helped me to have a mindset shift around so many different things, but specifically work culture, what community really looks like, and how being productive in a way that doesn't lead to overexerting myself and eventually leading to burnout. How I actually came to this realization was through a few books I read, as well as a few podcasts I listened to, along with some personal circumstances. It put things into perspective of how much I have tried to cram things in based on made up metrics that some random person or society has made up to serve someone else's agenda for their own personal gain, but really it was just putting a lot of strain on me. Now, this will be pretty morbid for a bit, but stick with me. It's going to get better, promise. And I promise it all ties in. Leading up to where I am today, my grandmother passed away. Prior to that, a close friend passed away, and even a cousin passed away. Through all of that, I personally feel like there was no time to really grieve and process everything that was happening in life. Life just kept lifing. However, when my grandma passed away and I stepped into a new decade of my life, I decided to take a solo vacation. I took a week off of work and I just went out of town by myself so I can start to think, what do I really want? This was when I started preparing for my gap year that I didn't even know at the time was coming sooner than I had expected. However, on that vacation, I had already started thinking about what I wanted my following year to look like. And part of what I was thinking is I don't want to be burnt out. I want to do work I enjoy, but not feel depleted or like I had done all this work for a company, but I didn't really have anything to show for myself, meaning no real time to spend with family and friends outside the holidays, which can get pretty expensive because that's when the prices of everything goes up, and that's also when everyone else is traveling, and it makes traveling feel way more stressful than it actually should. I wanted to have time to not always be jumping from one project to the next without having the time to reflect on what's actually working. I wanted to be able to feel more feminine, have a self-care rituals and routines, and not feeling like I was caring for myself, or caring for myself is something that had to be rushed or squeezed in only on the weekend, or it just felt like I didn't have the time to care for myself. And if I wanted to care for others that were close to me, I felt like I needed to make time to just do me and not squeeze in my personal life around work. It just felt like I was living to work and not working to live. So I thought about how much of a luxury it is for some folks to just be able to pursue a creative career path, to pursue whatever it is that they want. I thought about those folks who have the privilege to pursue a passion and not necessarily profession for financial stability. Those folks that I'm referring to typically has some sort of support, whether that's support through physically, someone helping them attain their goals, mentally encouraging them or financially supporting them with the resources so they can successfully attain their goals. And It has always been my life's mission or goal is to live a creative life, a life where I have the privilege to set my own schedule, work on projects that bring me joy, and wake up and truly be passionate and excited about my day and work on projects that are in alignment with my personal goals and values. So I've always sought out roles that allow me to do that while also working the roles that weren't so desirable. Because for me, that's just been my experience. You're not always going to land a role that allows you this luxury. And I have been sharing the journey and my process, well, as much of it as I can, but doing it in a way that feels resourceful and doing it in a way where it's not nagging, but sharing again resources, because the goal is to focus on the joy, the good. But I'm not going to act like life isn't lifing within the process of pursuing this, because there are some days where ish hits the fan. At times, I know I make things appear to be easy or like everything is working out. And in most cases, it is. But the reality of it is, it takes a lot of work. And it took a lot of effort to lay the foundation so I could have a slow morning, make my own schedule, and do whatever else I needed to get accomplished each day. I also try to be as mindful as I can when I make things, more specifically, when I made the space on this podcast to talk about the challenges I might have encountered along the way. I do this to put things into perspective, and it begins to normalize the creative process or whatever journey you're on. I think about just my own personal journey into the workforce or corporate America, or even post college experiences. I heard all the great stories about why it was so important to go to college, or why it was so important to work at this company or work within this industry. Basically, in my experience, I've heard the glamorous part of what people do, and it painted a false reality of what actually goes into things, especially what goes into things on a day to day basis and how it personally impacts your life. Maybe if more people talked about their process or their journey, creative or not, I think more people will be aware of what they're getting into and what they are actually signed up for. I also think that's why when you hear so many people and stories of what other individuals have been through, it also makes you feel a little less alone and gives hope, especially during times when you might be looking like, what the freak, okay? For instance, think about those shows where you have those women who are preparing to go through those childbirth process, and it's like, because you have seen and heard other stories, you now have somewhat of an idea of what to expect and what goes into it. I know I personally can remember lots of maybe aunts or cousins or close relatives or friends that are about to give childbirth, and they're watching all their those shows trying to prepare for that moment. And you might be one of those people where after seeing someone else's experience and you're like, you know what, maybe having kids is not for me, maybe this isn't for me. Now I know that's an extreme case, but that's the first example that comes to mind at the moment. Also, I think what is not discussed enough, especially since the panorama is structurally, how much community and support has shifted since COVID. I mentioned the loss of my grandmother, a family member, and a friend, because I think in the hustle and bustle of people working their day jobs, we oftentimes forget how your community and your network has contributed to helping you maintain your livelihood. Think of the family members or friends you might have relied on for carpooling situations to get maybe yourself to and from work, or maybe if you have kids, to and from school. Think of the people you might have called just because they cross your mind and you can count on them for a good laugh or lighthearted conversation. And now that that person has passed on or they're no longer in your life, you realize how much that person might have been unintentionally your free therapist, or the person that was giving you wisdom, or just structurally being the foundation for maybe hosting the family gatherings or get-togethers. And now that that's removed, you have to rebuild new traditions, new outlets, and just the impact that it has on you. It's something I personally thought about a lot. Let's talk a little bit about what some of you might be thinking, or the elephant in the room. How do you move forward if you go through a rough patch, whether that's grief, a layoff, burnout, or ish just hits the fan? How do you still attempt to show up as your best self, work towards your goals despite navigating circumstances that are beyond your control? And I'm not claiming to have all the answers here, but for me and in my experience, the short answer is to focus on what you can control, which is yourself. The long answer is, and my personal response to most things is, I'm still going to find a way to enjoy myself and find a way to have a good time. Again, I'm not saying I got it all figured out and I have all the answers. This is just how I have been navigating through things, because there's no sense in worrying while trying to figure things out. It's only going to create a more stressful and tension-filled environment. Now, don't get me wrong. I have my days where I'm like, what the freak? What's going on? My zodiac sign, I'm a Cancer, so the waterworks and tears are for sure flowing. I don't know if I'll ever share that side of me on the internet or publicly, but what I do is I feel the things and I talk my smack. I talk my ish behind closed doors about how effed up things are. And then I'm like, all right, girl, enough of that. Let's regroup and let's get it together. I came to this realization because, similarly to noticing the theme of what is my creative capacity, a similar theme that has shown up in my life is I can remember specific moments in my life where things are not always going well. And someone will be like, let's throw a party, let's barbecue, or let's take a trip, let's turn up. And in those moments, I will look at people with a blank stare and just think, you said what now? You want to do what now? I can look at them and really think and ask them, you want to throw a party? You want to throw a barbecue? You want to take a trip? You want to do whatever? And we have all of this going on right now? Like, it kind of reminded me of the movie Friday After Next, when Craig and Day were trying to pay their rent. And they were like, let's throw a rent party. And similarly, this past year, when life was lifing, I was like, you know what? Let's throw a party. Let's barbecue. But what's my version of a rent party or a barbecue? My whole thing I've been into is tapping into your creative flow. Sounds very woo, right? Sounds very like, okay, let's be real, okay? I'm always preaching this. What's the most convenient, fulfilling, logical path? And I was really tested this year because I had to figure out what was my version of throwing a barbecue as I figured things out. What was my version of finding the joy in the midst of the storm? Sometimes you gotta relax so you can clearly think of a plan and not be operating out of survival mode, but actually and actively creating a plan forward, but for your thriving self, not for your surviving or trying to figure it out self. So here's another post that I came across that really resonated with me. And it reads, when you don't have to worry about paying for bills, you have time to think. That makes you extremely dangerous. This is why it's designed for us to never reach that level. If you're always in survival mode, you will never have the time or energy to maximize your potential. So I share that because here is what I had to do moving forward. I started last year off top of mind, everything that I just mentioned to you all. Last year, I started my year off by attending a meditation retreat because I needed to figure out how to regulate my nervous system. Entrepreneurship can be scary. Stepping out on your own, whether it's moving away from your parents, a romantic partner, relocating to a new city, the thought of that is scary. And I've done all of those things on multiple occasions. So at the beginning of last year, I was like, all right, I'm going to need some armor to kind of help get me through this because I've been here before and I know how it is. And in the past, there had been challenges. And in the midst of those challenges, I needed to have something that I could immediately go to keep me level headed, calm, and keep my vision and goals top of mind. My grandmother was a person I would call and be my personal retreat. We all have our things we like to retreat to. For some folks, it's food. For some folks, it's shopping, it's traveling. It's something that we like to retreat to that keeps us grounded, calm, or kind of is able to make us snap back into things, you know? Now that that is no longer an option, I had to figure out what was my new place to retreat. So I did a meditation retreat. I learned a few techniques to help me regulate my nervous system in those moments of when doubt tried to creep in, or when my anxiety got out of hand, or when those moments of overthinking or feeling stuck, I had to have affirmations that I could recite. I had developed a workout routine to kind of blow off some steam, and I started meal prepping and cooking. And I mean, for real, for real. And if you've watched any of my sewing videos online, and if you watched any of my personal YouTube videos, I have the burn marks on my wrist and on my hands to prove it. Because me and my oven, we have been tussling. And I got to get some oven mitts at some point or make some. But anyway, I started meal prepping because I also needed to fuel myself and prepare myself for all the things and just give myself the strength and the mental capacity to just be able to take on this new chapter and this new journey that I was planning to embark on. A few other things I did was I made a vision board, I journaled, and I documented a lot of my process. In a way, this podcast is a way that I personally document what I've been up to and what's going on in the world right now. So consider this podcast a digital voice note into my creative process, along with a few other creative entrepreneurial stories, because some days you might look up and be like, where did the time go? Or what did I even do with my time? And I'm going to give y'all an example because I love a good example. But you know how you have that one family member or a friend where you talk to them, and when they ask you for advice, you can clearly see why they're facing the issues or challenges they are having. It's like it's easy for me to see what someone else needs to do, but when it comes to your own personal situations, you may not be able to see it as clear as someone else's situation because you are too in the thick of it. You're so deep into living your day-to-day life, and at times you don't have the capacity to zoom out. And I feel like this past year was my gap year to somewhat figure my life out, because not everyone has had the privilege to have a sabbatical. Not everyone has had the privilege to just had a period of time in their life where they can just shack up with a relative and figure their ish out. That is such a privilege that I think some folks take for granted or don't even realize is a thing. But for a lot of people, it's a thing. And if it's not a thing for you, you have to be intentional about carving out your time in this world so that way you can clearly zoom out and think, what do you want for yourself? So you're not just kind of pushed and forced along into things because you're trying to survive your day to day and you haven't got to that place where you're trying to thrive. For me, there are gaps of time that I cannot remember or recall what I was doing. And the more mature, yes, over here, I try to say mature and not old, because like fine wine, we get better as we age. Maybe not always physically, but we get more wisdom and experience about life. I think it's funny how we love to see people with high numbers of followers, large amounts of money in their bank account, or high credit scores. But somehow when it comes to age, it's either dated or old. Make it make sense. So I try to do my best with trying to phase out the verbiage of old in how I say things, because I'll be damned if somebody called me old as I age, okay? So I try to say mature. But in the same sense, some days with the now I used to pile onto my to-do list, the brain fog got real. I can give you a vague idea of what I was doing, but nothing precise or detailed or in depth. I'm not for certain, but it's through things as simple as capturing a photo or a video or even these podcasts that reminds me of what I'm doing during a specific time period of my life. It's the documenting of the simple joys of life. I remember vaguely I had a conversation years ago with my goddaughter. I was with my cousin and my goddaughter. We were in Miami and we were in the car headed somewhere. And my goddaughter turned to me and she was like, "Do you know what you were doing at my age?" And at the time, I believe she was around 7. And I kind of looked at her because it was such an innocent question. It had no agenda, no real why behind what she had asked. It was just pure curiosity. And it's moments like that where I wish I could just reach into my back pocket and just show her because I could not remember. But what it did spark for me is that in that moment was to remember to continue to document and capture the simple joys of life and also capture the not so great moments. Not get so caught up in the hype of social media, but to just remember to capture moments of what I'm up to, your day to day activities, so it doesn't feel like life is just happening, but you can tangibly look back and put context to what you're doing, what's been going on, and things and life and moments aren't just passing you by. I found that this has been super helpful because in those moments where I would get really hard on myself about why I wasn't able to show up for someone or show up for myself. And I would be like, what were you doing on that day? Or what was going on? Journaling and having a daily planner and documenting just my process and what I've been up to and what's been going on a daily basis, that has made all the difference in the world. Like there have been moments where I've made a to-do list and then life just be life. And like out of nowhere, I kid you not, on 2 separate occasions, I got a flat tire one day, and then on another occasion, my windshield wiper randomly popped off in the middle of rain and while I was on the expressway. So I had to go spend time getting this fixed and getting this repaired, and I spent some time doing this and that, and it took away from what I actually had planned and what I needed to get done that day. So now time that I had planned to do something else, it ended up going towards repairing my car. But the fact that I journaled it and I documented this, it allowed me to give myself some grace because there were moments where I was hard on myself and I was like, girl, you couldn't show up for yourself this day. You couldn't go to the gym and work out, or you didn't feel like cooking this day because you were too drained from running all around town trying to figure out how to get your tire fixed and try to figure out how to get a replacement part so your windshield wiper can be popped back onto your car. So documenting and reflecting on what's happening, whether what's going well, what's not going so well, this allows me to somewhat be able to prepare on how to navigate and improve moving forward. It has made the difference of me having life just happen to me or living a life that feels fulfilling and intentional. So I'm challenging you to start printing some of your own receipts. It doesn't have to be as public and as grand as like what I'm doing, like producing a podcast and making YouTube videos and chronicling publicly everything that I'm doing. It doesn't have to be that grand, but start creating some digital and physical receipts that you are doing stuff. Stuff is happening, and remind yourself of who you are. So in those moments of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, you are able to quiet your mind. You can shut that inner voice up inside of you by saying, listen, these are the receipts. I've been doing the work. I've been doing the best I can, and I'm owning my time as much as I can. And I'm doing the things that I want to do. Life isn't happening to me, and I am the creative director of my life. And these are the things I did that made me happy within this past year. The main way I like to calm my nervous system, especially as someone at times I can be a perfectionist or overthinker, I personally have to distract my thoughts of doubt or negativity by reminding myself, like, nah, girl, you really been standing on business and putting in work. Another post that I came across this past year, and it reads, you cannot afford to waste valuable years being non productive because no one is coming to save us. The sooner you prioritize getting the bag, the sooner your freedom will come. For instance, some of the things I reflected on was the parts of my business I'm good at and the parts I'm not so good at. The part I really wanted to show was the admin, but once I got ready to show that, I'm like, wow, maybe that's not my strong suit. And I'm really unable to let people into something I'm still working to figure out, especially when this is my profession and I'm supposed to be good at everything. And I learned this about myself through a hobby. I mentioned earlier that I started sewing, and this past year that I've leaned into sewing and I started sharing my sewing journey online. But I really wanted to show people my sewing process. But when I got to certain steps, I was stomped on. I was like, how do I do this thing I said I wanted to do, but it's scary? It's vulnerable. And it's hard to let people into my process because I'm still trying to figure it out. But the thing about letting people into your process is you can articulate out loud what you are struggling with, and people can make suggestions or help you navigate through the challenges you are facing. And I had to come to terms with, I have to stop thinking that I have to have everything figured out and that there's this expectation that I should know it all. No one knows it all and no one has everything figured out. Some people has it figured out to a certain extent, but we got to stop putting ourselves on this pedestal to the point where we feel like we have to have it all figured out. And I say we, but I really mean I just say we, so I don't feel alone in this and y'all don't feel left out. But there are so many folks who have mastered the art of always bigging themselves up and making things appear more than what it is. And I think that's how people in society and culture shifts, is because people will tell you the surface stuff, but not really tell you what you're really signing up for. For instance, when most people signed up for college, we thought we were signing up for a guaranteed job at the end of it, but not realizing we're actually signing up for student loans and signing up for the hustle of finding work to pay back debt. Like, we have to talk about the process of things so we can be more aware of what we are really signing up for. That's how change happens. It's when people talk about what's going on, you are less likely to fall into the trap of getting into something that you had no intention or you had no plans on getting involved with in the first place. But on the flip side, if we fall into the trap of only talking about surface stuff for likes and clicks and dollars, we're not really being productive. We're just being distracted. Now, I'm not saying tell every single thing that you have going on in your life. Like, you can pick and choose what areas to practice discernment. However, that's what this podcast is about. It's about talking through the creative process, whether that's business, a creative pursuit. It's to talk about what's working and what's not working so well, but in a way that feels judgment free. When I tell you the amount of people and folks that reached out and supported when I said I wanted to give entrepreneurship and content creation a try full time, listen, I was honestly surprised at the support and connections I made. When I picked up my hobby and started sharing and documenting my process online, the feedback I received was, again, surprising, but overall positive and supportive. I know there have been times where I might have thought I don't have support, but then I had to ask myself in the same breath, did you reach out and tell people what you're doing? Did you let them know all the things that you've been doing and working on to get to this point? Did you let them into what you've been doing and working on so far? Have you clearly communicated your vision, your plan, and your goal? Because no one can support you if you are not letting them into your process. Being real about what you want and what's going on and the steps you are taking to get there. So this past year, I stepped out of my comfort zone a lot. And it made me so uncomfortable because anyone who knows me knows I'm usually a quiet, reserved, and I keep to myself. I'm a really reserved kind of person. I like to say I'm on my digital glow up journey. I've been intentionally sharing my creative process, the projects I'm working on, and what it's actually like when you are the creative director of your life and you are pursuing a path that might look different from anyone else within your family or your immediate social group. Now, because people go people, and I gotta be real with y'all, when you do start to document your story and digitally start putting yourself out there and you're on your digital glow up journey, there will be some folks that will make nasty comments. And even though we have all heard people say to just ignore the haters and the nasty comments, it's one thing to hear it, but to actually experience it in real time, it's two different things. Which is why, again, I go back to the meditation retreat I did at the beginning of this year. It not only needed to be something that I can go to ground me, to keep myself calm when facing challenges, but mentally, I had to be able to build up the mental capacity of being able to endure what I already knew comes with the territory of creating content online or putting myself out there and being more visible. You open yourself up to more opinions, feedback, and comments outside of what you may personally be thinking. The way I've been navigating it is simply saying something a family member told me a while ago. Those are just not your people. If someone you don't know is rude or nasty to you or says something that is unconstructive and gives you unconstructive criticism, then those are not your people. Going back to that reference of throwing a rip party, as you are building or pursuing things, you have to constantly evaluate who are your people, and you wouldn't invite people you don't mess with to your party. So if you are building a business, a digital community, or just evaluating relationships and connections, ask yourself, would you party with them? Would you kick it with them? Are you fostering a space and facilitating a space that people that you can see yourself being in community with? I've learned to take what's constructive and leave the rest. Here's a prime example. I had someone mentioned in one of my sewing YouTube videos say, I'm not going to subscribe because you are begging for subscribers. And when I first looked at that comment, I did feel some type of way, but only for a little bit. It felt uncomfortable at first because again, I'm on my digital glow up journey. This is something new for me. I'm putting myself out there in a way that feels new to me, and it's uneasy and it's vulnerable when you start something new. But I reminded myself this is part of the process. Then my second thought was, what's the good at this? Even though on the surface there was nothing nice or good about it, I was like, oh, this person really doesn't know how this works. This person doesn't get it. They don't understand that a part of putting yourself out there comes with telling people how you want them to engage and interact. This person doesn't know that when you create content and now creating content for a living, that telling people to subscribe, comment, or whatever affects my bottom line, this person isn't in my shoes and it's not my place to inform this person. But it's up to me to acknowledge and see the good in this, which is this person isn't for me. And thank you for clearly bringing this to my attention so we both can now go our separate ways. It's also pushed me to think creatively of what's a different approach I could take to let my community or the people I'm trying to connect with, or as I like to call the people I'm connecting with online, my creative crew, how can I encourage them to connect with me in a way that feels genuine and authentic to me, that doesn't feel cringy or robotic? Every now and then I have a few off-putting comments, but for the most part, people understand the assignment and the right people get it. It's been a balancing act of figuring out what works best and also identifying when someone is coming from a good place. Another example is a comment I received was, "I really enjoy your videos, but I had to stop watching because I only seen you talking." Now, if I was a closed-minded person, I could have taken this comment as offensive, like, "Wow, this is my video. Why wouldn't you want to see me?" However, I took the comment as constructive criticism because it told me, "Girl, do less. People don't even want to see me talk. They came to see what I'm talking about." That made me realize I don't always have to make videos where my face is in it. I don't have to do my hair all the time. I don't always have to be concerned if maybe one day I'm having a skin flare up, or I don't always have to be camera ready. It also taught me that if people are truly interested in a topic, people will listen. So something I did for a hobby encouraged me to think about my profession and craft in a completely different way. It made me think more about leaning into creating more faceless content and how to create videos in a way, rethinking the way I structure my life and routine in different ways. Just because you might have traditionally seen things function one particular way, it's important to practice testing out different crafts, hearing different perspectives so you don't get stuck thinking there is only one way of existing and being. The good part about letting people into your process and sharing with others is you're able to create outside of a vacuum and allows you to think outside of what's presented in front of us. Something else that reconfirmed this sentiment is I recently reconnected with an old elementary school friend who made an IG post, and I came across it, and the post read, "I found out that the remedy to burnout is restructuring your life." And this stuck with me because, as you all know, as I've mentioned, I've been in the phase of restructuring my life. I'm on a journey of figuring out what my days look like now that I'm pursuing entrepreneurship full time and content creation. Every now and then, I still apply for a job because why not? However, I think where I'm uniquely positioned is the work that I do is I've had both the corporate experience as well as the freelance experience. And I think both, whether you work at a fancy company or you work for yourself, there are glamorous parts about both. And then there's the not so sexy parts about both. But the real freedom to me is being able to choose which path you want to take. When I unintentionally took this gap year, I went into it with the mindset of focusing on what I want it to be. The glamorous part of working at a fancy corporate job are the work perks, all the benefits you get, and the built-in support in some aspects you get from working in a corporate setting. And the mindset shift I had to have around me working for myself is what's stopping me from setting those perks up on my own? What's stopping me from getting a gym membership? What's stopping me from stocking my cabinet with the fancy teas and snacks and getting an independent insurance plan? What's stopping me from doing all the things that attracted me to work at this fancy company in the first place? I hadn't quite figured out how to have that 401k company match perk as an entrepreneur, but where there is a will, there is a way. Maybe now that just means I have to learn how to invest in other areas. If it's not a 401k company match, if that's not an option right now, I just need to learn how to invest my funds in other areas. The only thing that's really stopping me is I just have to do the hard work of setting it all up while doing all the other tasks that come along with being an entrepreneur. The glamorous part of entrepreneurship is you get to make your own schedule, but when you have so much freedom over making your schedule, you could either fall into the trap of overworking or not having cutoff times and burning out, or doing a bunch of stuff that isn't really moving the business to the goals that you need to acquire. So this season is going to cover a few different topics: identifying your creative capacity, creating community, and building systems and finding the help you need to improve your productivity, and getting through the rough patches by sharing your process and documenting your story. Hopefully, through these episodes, we can navigate where you currently are and work together towards where you want to be. Or maybe you're not an entrepreneur and you're just here to live vicariously through me. Whatever the case is, I'm happy to have you here. So let's do it. Also, exploring hobbies, free activities, and how to get free stuff when you are a solo entrepreneur. I realized a long time ago that you have to commit to something to keep yourself grounded. And something that I have committed to is I'm always going to be a creative. It's just something that's within me that I cannot turn off. The entrepreneurship is something else inside of me that I cannot turn off. It's just an off switch that I don't have within me. And when you are creative and you are an entrepreneur and you are a creative entrepreneur, you have to make time to play because the long game, which is you have to build the momentum and the capacity to take care of yourself so you don't burn out. In order to take care of yourself, you have to learn how to enjoy the process because here's what we're not going to do. And when I say we, I mainly mean but I'm a solo creative entrepreneur, so I'm including y'all into this with me. So what we not gonna do is spend all day looking for a job and not take at least 1 to 2 hours to have fun, go outside and do something for yourself. What we not gonna do is spend all day caring for other people, looking out for others, and not taking some time to care for yourself. What we not gonna do is spend all day scrolling or internally beating ourselves up about what you don't have and what you wish you could have when you could spend the time doing the same thing, sharing your gifts, your talents, and your experiences and your story with the world. So what we not gonna do is dim our light around others who might not be on the same path as us. Meaning if I'm feeling good or we finally get that job or that promotion or we secure a client or you reach whatever goal you're working on, but someone around us is not in a good place, you don't have to match their energy. Still feel good and maybe that will rub off on them. Pop yo ish because at the end of the day, being humble will never serve you, especially if you are running a business or you are pursuing a creative career path. You have to be bold about the things you want out of life and you have to show up, share your side of the story. And what I mean about share your side of the story is you have to show your work. You have to be proud of the things that you make, good or bad. Tell people what you do for fun or on the side. That's how you start moving and building momentum towards the things that feel fulfilling. If your job is draining you or you're not feeling creative or you want things to be different, slowly start carving out the time to intentionally do something to work towards that. Exploring a new hobby, then start building your routine or your day around things you want to be doing. Then before you know it, you will look up and things will just be different. Now, I'm not saying go out and quit your day job. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is if there is something that you want, slowly start to take the steps towards doing that. Most importantly, throw a party. And by party, I mean find your people, your community, and connect with them. Share the highs and the lows because that's your story. Own it. Why not? That's just what it is. That's what you're going through. And it's not my problem if you want me or anybody else wants me to act like I got it all together. Or some days I may not be feeling all put together because that's not the case. And I had so many examples in my life of people that appeared to have it all together, but were silently struggling, and pride and ego get you left in the dark. Some might say I'm in my delusional era of trying to build a business in the middle of a recession, but sometimes you have to be. I mean, take a look at some of the ridiculous stuff that we are surrounded by. So occasionally, I personally tap into a little Delulu land to navigate some of the ridiculous stuff that we are surrounded by on a daily basis. Regardless, I'm one of those people who thinks I can build a life where I'm not working all of the time. I want to live my best life by becoming the best version of myself that I can be and not just out here living to work or living to work off debt and to only pay off basic living expenses. I don't think that's what we are put on this earth to do. I want to minimize the time I work to maximize productivity. Why is that a crazy ask? That's how things should be, right? Part of my idea of doing this is having a work schedule that allows me to have consistent clients coming into my business for one part of the year and then producing this podcast for the second portion of the year, and have a month-long break in between the work I do so I can spend more than a weekend, a holiday break with friends and family, and take time to learn a new hobby or improve my craft. I'm just so fed up with trying to fit in and rush taking care of myself or checking in on friends and family around work. Like, I want the thing that I do for work and my life to somehow coexist and not feel like they are these two separate things, because one does have an impact on the other. Like, I think a lot of us forget that there are some businesses that operate annually or only during certain seasons. And I had this conversation with a client within this past year. Like, we are not meant to be turned on all of the time. So I need to do some restructuring personally so I can figure out, how do I make a living that allows me to show up and be my best self, but also maintain my livelihood and allows me a little bit of balance so that way I can enjoy the fruits of my labor. So you can either stick around and watch my journey to see if I achieve it, or maybe you could stick around and confirm if it is indeed just my delusional idea. Either way, I'm going to be documenting and sharing my story along with others who are out here doing things and making it happen. I guess you could say I've been working overtime, doing double the work, working on myself and working on my business. Those have always been two very separate things, but I'm determined to make working on myself my business. A few things I mentioned at the top of the episode was I wanted to leave you all with some things I learned, and like always, share a few tools and resources to take away. So one of the things I learned, and a term that I came across within this past year, is called tech stacking. If you are unfamiliar with this term, it's essentially where you use a bunch of technology and tools to get something done. So for instance, I didn't realize I was tech stacking when I used Notion to organize my workflow and to plan my content. Then I will also use GoodNotes to plan my personal day-to-day. And then occasionally I would use Apple Notes for quick notes, like making a grocery store list or to write down like a random travel recommendation or something like that. Just something that I really quickly needed to jot down if I didn't have access to a pen and paper. Basically, tech stacking is where I'm using 3 different tools to essentially accomplish one goal, which is to organize my projects and daily tasks. A part of everything I mentioned about the goals I want to achieve both personally and professionally all boils down to being productive, organized, and disciplined. So something I'm planning to do in the next year is to figure out how to simplify the amount of tools I use to streamline and simplify my life and my process. Part of the reason why in the past I might have felt spread thin is because I always have literally and figuratively, I've always had a million tabs open. So I'm going to get on my digital glow up journey and figure out which tools work the most effective for me and try to stick to using that. For example, one of the things I did this year was I used to use Zoom calls to produce this podcast. And this year I made the switch to Riverside to streamline the editing process. So at some point, I'm going to be sharing how I've been implementing that into my process. So far, I like what I'm seeing, but if you want to see for yourself, you can use my code and give it a try, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can see how I personally have been using this tool and incorporating it into my business as well as my day-to-day activities. From time to time, I share the behind the scenes videos of what I use to run my solo operation over here. Another tool I leaned into pretty heavy this past year was ChatGPT. I was real apprehensive at first about using AI, but the one thing that I came to terms with is AI will never defeat OI, which is original intelligence. I have to remember that OGs and the original intelligence never gets intimidated, but instead observes and figures out how to use it to add on to what I already know and connect it to my real human experiences and feelings. It's kind of similar to, how if you've ever had someone who's tried to copy your whole personality or identity by doing stuff like wearing the same outfits as you or copying trips that you've probably taken or even saying certain phrases they wouldn't typically say. It's like, nah, you tried it. You really tried to copy me, but you're not even doing it right. Or some experiences you just can't get from technology. So, for instance, the experience of running through a fire hydrant water hose during a hot summer day, AI will never be able to describe. Is that experience that you have when someone from the neighborhood has cracked open a fire hydrant and the water is now spewing everywhere, and now you can run through the fire hydrant water, just kind of cool off from a hot summer day. Or maybe you're just outside running around all day, and instead of you running in the house to go get water, you just turn on the water hose that's on the side of the house and you drink out the side of the water hose to just take a sip. It's little detailed experiences and nuances that you really can't imitate and you can't replicate. Those are real experiences that cannot be, again, imitated. And you just have to find the ways to weave and incorporate your real life, your real experiences into the things that you're using, and just kind of use this AI and this technology, not leaning on it so heavily, but figuring out how does it complement what you're already doing, or how can it alleviate some of the workload or the task load that you might currently have on your plate. There are just certain lived experiences that can't be replicated, imitated, or easily spotted. So this was another part of me beginning to practice my digital glow up journey. Here is another specific area that kind of helped me get clear on how to digitally start putting myself out there more and sharing my gifts and talents. One of the things I did was I stopped being intimidated by technology and started making time to learn how to make it work for me and not against me. Another part of my digital glow up was putting myself out there more. I'm more of an in-person kind of gal, but I told myself I would start bringing what I do in real life online because I just personally wanted to do better in that area. I see so many people doing dope stuff, and I would be like, wow, if I just put myself out there more, I could be doing the same thing and getting the same opportunities. I've just never been into being boastful online. So it's definitely a new area for me, and it has pushed me out of my comfort zone in so many ways to just put myself out there. Part of being a creative or an entrepreneur is you have to know how to brag about yourself and your work. There is no room for humbleness, as I mentioned earlier. Being humble will get you left behind. So I'm going to take this time to brag about some things I achieved this past year, and once I finish, I encourage you to do the same. Make a list of things you did this year that made you proud, or if you're watching this on YouTube, brag about yourself in the comments. Tell me what you did, or tell me something that you are most proud of achieving this past year. Even if all you did was take more regular naps, I'm proud of you, okay? Go off. This is a safe space for you to do that. So a few of my goals were to put myself out there more, network, start documenting and sharing my creative process. And here's what I did. I released the documentary I worked on with a client and collaborator I actually had featured on my podcast last year around this time. The documentary has won several awards and is now available to watch on Amazon Prime and a few other streaming platforms, all thanks to him having the courage to document and share his story. So check it out if you're interested. I'll include the details of it in the show notes. I also explored working as a fractional worker for a media company. I got a few individual clients and projects that I independently produce, as well as producing this podcast. Now, for my folks who like to read, a book that I read this past year that has stuck with me is called The Multi-Hyphenate. It kind of referenced how having portfolio careers and how the shift in work culture is moving towards people having portfolios of different projects they've worked on or different industries they've worked in, just because the way the work culture is shifted. And we have seen that in so many articles and just things that people have been putting out online as studies, just like how this new generation, they have not been in the same work industry for more than 2 or maybe 4 years. And just with the restructuring of so many organizations and the shift in the way we have done work in person and just shifted to working more in a remote capacity, so much of that has shifted. And after I read that book, I went down a rabbit hole of exploring portfolio careers, because that's essentially what I'm doing. Traditionally, before technology, it was the norm for people to get one job and stick with it for 5+ years. But if you take a look around with things changing, that's not the case so much at all. And that's not the case in a few industries. I mean, you do have some professions that have not evolved as much. However, specifically for me within my industry, I can definitely pinpoint the different areas how technology, the internet, and media has just kind of shifted and evolved over the years. Like foundationally, the role of firefighters will be to put out a fire and to save people in the event of a fire. Now, there might be new tools that come up that might help them communicate with their teammates better or whatever, but essentially the core basis of what they do will always be the same. I think that's not my profession to really go to in detail to talk about that. But I do think that there are some industries that will kind of be the same over the long haul. And then there will be some professions that will kind of constantly evolve and change as technology and people change. So whether you are in your early career or you're making a career pivot, I think it's also good for you to zoom out and ask yourself, are you going to be in a place years from now where you are going to be open and willing to change and adapt with all these new technology and features and things in that nature? And I'm saying this now and I'm articulating this now because this was something that I did not articulate at the early stages of my career. A lot of what I did as a videographer and what I do as a videographer is I travel a lot. And so when you travel a lot, and you are somebody who is self-aware, and I know that I'm a homebody, I have to ask myself, like, the longevity of me being in this career path where it requires me to travel and be away from home, and also with my core values of the things that I value, which is family and friends and community. Oftentimes I have to ask myself, is the path that I'm on, is that in alignment with who I am as a person? Again, trying to figure out and restructure my life around how I am showing up in this world, my values, and the things that I plan to have in my life on a day-to-day basis. I think that there's no way we're going back to blockbuster movies. So as the industry changes, I have to change, or I have to change industries. So those are just some things to consider and some things to look forward to. If you are experiencing, again, a pivot, get creative on how you can move forward. What's the core part of who you are and how can you build around that? So hopefully you found something of value in this episode. I do realize that this is a very, very long episode. I had to take a break in between me talking. I know as you're viewing this, it probably seems like one consistent stream of thought, but I definitely have sat down. I've taken a break. I had a little snack. I drank a little water. I went and freshened up my makeup. I've done a few things in and out of this episode, but I won't keep you all any longer. So, again, hopefully you found something of value in this episode. Be sure to connect with me online. Have patience and grace with me because I'm still out here navigating this on my own. But connect with me. I'm on majority of the social media platforms. Let me know what you're looking forward to in the new year. How are you staying inspired and motivated or reclaiming your time by exploring new hobbies? Let me know what y'all are out here doing and stick around to check out the rest of the episodes I'm releasing this season. I have some really exciting episodes coming up. I also want to make sure that I share my experience about what it's been like to tap into meditation and my experience with like somatic exercises. And I just want to share more about how I kind of got into those practices and how it's affected me, and share my thoughts on this whole lazy girl era and more terms and phrases and things that I've just kind of come across. I have more things to share with you all. So again, I'm not going to continue to be chatty. All the details of some of the things that I've mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye.